I'm James Brierton in Charlotte, and grab the pumpkin spice latte because Evan Fisher is back with us. Hello, Evan.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to see you. Former Carolina Weather Group panelist and fall foliage extraordinaire from Explore Fall, the man, the myth, the legend, who I feel like every time I turn on the TV, it is Explore Fall's fall foliage forecast. So glad you're back with us on the pod this week to talk what we can expect from the upcoming fall season, because whether we like it or not, fall is knocking on the door. And I want to start, Evan, if I may, by putting this tweet on the screen. It says you're thinking of starting the idea of a podcast, but not one of those where people just ramble for 60 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and keep tonight's conversation really short because I hear you. I know who you're talking about, and I think it was us.
No, I've got this nasty habit of talking about fall foliage for way too long, so you just cut me off when the
I
time
just
is
cut
right.
you off. Okay.
That's
Oh, so
right.
you're the guy who rambles for an
I'm the
hour.
problem. Yeah.
Okay, because I know a certain weather pod that rambles for an hour, and
When you get
but
passionate about things, it's hard to stop.
that time just flies. So
It
let's
does.
get into it. It's September now. People are probably thinking, if they haven't already, ooh, what weekend am I going to go up to the mountains to see the fall leaves? Tell me, what does the season hold for us this year?
Yeah, it'll be a little bit of a hectic season, unfortunately. We're coming out of a difficult summer with some crazy extremes from too much rain to too little rain, and we can dive into all of that. But really kind of the mile high perspective on this season is that it will still be okay color. I'm not expecting the greatest show ever, but these fall foliage displays really never completely flop. So sometime, around October 20th, October 25th, that's generally my favorite time to come to the mountains, especially around Asheville. For folks who prefer the Boone area, that's a little bit cooler, higher elevation. So maybe just a few days earlier than that, the 17th to the 23rd, 24th, somewhere in there. But it'll be a great season. Looking forward to it.
But for folks who are watching with us on Facebook and YouTube, audio podcast listeners, you could check us out over there to see this map. Here is the Explore Fall average fall foliage peak from 1991 through 2020. So I think you've already kind of hit on these time frames, but these weekends are theoretically right around the corner.
Yeah, really, it's only about a month out for the earliest spots. And then the more kind of metropolitan areas like Boone and Nashville, a month and a half or so. But our August flew by. I don't know if you felt the same way, but I swear I blinked and went from full summer to fall right around the corner and pumpkin spice already out. So these these time frames are creeping up on us fast.
I feel like I was getting my kid ready for the first day of school, and the Target app was already sending me notifications for Halloween costumes, and I was like, one thing at a time,
That's right.
please.
They've been
So
pushing it.
you mentioned weather extremes, and I feel like I can say here in Charlotte, I know we finished meteorological summer as the ninth warmest. Probably would have been even warmer if we didn't get that fake fall right there at the very end of August. But um, temperatures were one extreme. Precipitation was another extreme. Just earlier this month, we got 4 inches of rain at my house here near Matthews in one weekend. It was like in two goes, and it was coming down at like 1 inch every 20 minutes, and it just kind of like pounded, right? So we got almost like a month's worth of rain in like 2 weekends. You mentioned extremes. So what are some of those weather extremes that maybe the fall leaves are gonna have to dabble with?
Yeah, well, you really already hit the nail on the head there that we've been all over the place this summer, and that's really the problem. What we want is this perfect little Goldilocks zone where summer was exactly average, no more, no less. Not too much rain, not too little rain. But this year we saw copious amounts of rain at times, followed by week-long droughts. And some of those droughts plunged us as far as, I think, severe drought in
Mm-hmm.
parts of the Carolinas. And that's still lingering, especially in western parts of the state. And I suppose I should probably look at the drought monitor for the east part of the state. It might be lingering out there too. But regardless, it's too little, too late, even if it were to be cleared up at this point. The damage has been done, and that's really manifesting itself as this weird early, what I call
Yeah.
stress color. So
Mm-hmm.
this is it's really kind of manifests itself in maples and poplar trees and a few others, but those are the two that are most prone to stress. And late July, August, even early September, we start to see this early color pop up out of the trees. It'll be out on the tips of them, reds and oranges, and people start to get excited that fall is here. And the reality is, it's really unhealthy trees that are suffering from
Yeah.
the pummeling they've endured this summer. So unfortunately, that generally leads to duller colors come peak fall foliage. That isn't always a tried and true thing. On occasion, drought stress does crazy things to leaves. So I always try to throw in the caveat that when we have conditions like this, just expect it to be erratic. If you find one spot that has bad colors, go just a mountain over, go a few miles away, and it could be spectacular.
In my yard alone, I have one tree that's already yellow for the reasons that you just outlined. And
Yeah.
then at the base of it, there's like tulips blooming. And I'm like,
Yes.
what is happening here?
It's a very confusing season.
It's
Thankfully, September is playing out well at the moment, and we'll see how the month ends. But the first 5 days or so have been pleasant. And if we can keep this up, we might be able to generate more of those kind of reds that everyone likes to see in October. But we'll see. Jury's still out. We're going to cross those fingers that the hurricane season stays quiet and the tropical
yeah.
systems stay out of here.
I was just actually going to ask you. That's a perfect transition. So, what are some of the factors that even going forward are still on the table that could derail us?
Yeah, so two of the biggest ones are tropical storms or hurricanes, even that can barrel all the way into the Carolinas, and drought. In the last 5 years, we've had instances of both that have impacted the fall color. Drought tends to lead to premature leaf drop if it's extreme, or delayed leaf drop if it's not extreme. It's a really fine line there, and I couldn't tell you exactly where it is, but somewhere in that spectrum, you go from early leaf drop to late leaf drop. And then the storms that can come through, it's a fairly obvious impact, but if the leaves are already starting to turn, the high wind and heavy rain can knock them down and unfortunately spoil what could have been otherwise a good show.
I think a lot of people listen to our podcast when it comes out on Wednesday or Thursday morning's commute. And let's say they're gearing up for a trip this weekend to the mountains. What can they expect from Explore Fall to help them find that peak spot?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do maintain a interactive daily fall foliage prediction map on the website. It's generally our biggest feature. So if you pull up the explorefall.com, it'll say find foliage near me. Just click that. And it'll bring you to this map where you can zoom into the Carolinas. You could search for a city or search for your destination, and it will bring you in real tight. Now, I will say, I'm so sorry, Western North Carolina people, but there are approximately 1 million pixels in this map. So it's difficult to fine tune every single one of them. There's a couple spots in Western North Carolina that I actually would disagree with a little bit. I think some of the highest elevations are doing something funny, and I couldn't tell you exactly what it is. I've been trying to fix it in my free time the past couple weeks. But if you were to step it forward to, let's say, October 15th, you'd see that a few of the highest elevation locations, like Mount Mitchell and the Balsams are where that little blue pin is down there, they're still showing green when on October 12th, those will be peak color. So I couldn't tell you what's going on, but I got a whole country to manage, so I try to cut myself some slack every now and then.
I got
But
every leaf on every tree in the entire country to try to manage. But I appreciate that honesty from you because I think that's something that we've watched play out. Just getting to know you from the years you were with us on Carolina Weather Group, and then you left to do some schooling and really embraced this love you developed for fall foliage and developed it into a website. And like I mentioned, it's on so many TV stations and it's all over the internet, especially as we head into later September and early October. Talk to me a little bit, Evan, about that skill set that goes into pulling something like this off, even if there are a couple pixels that are still bothering.
yeah, well, it's all ridiculously fun, and that's been the most pleasant surprise about all of it. I think that's why I've pursued this for so long, is the science behind all of this fall foliage prediction is fascinating. And this interest really stems from an interest in the weather and just an interest in being outside here in Western North Carolina. All of the fall foliage predictions are made based off of weather variables. So low temperatures, high temperatures, precipitation, soil moisture, all of that goes into every single daily prediction that you might see. And it has been so cool to kind of just explore a niche that hasn't really been explored all that much. This is a underserved science, I would say, even more underserved than the weather is, and that's already an undeveloped science as it is. But I've fallen in love with it over the last couple of years. It may have been accidental at first. I think back in 2020 or so, I made some fall foliage maps, and suddenly people were asking my expert opinion, and I was like, "Whoa, what's happening?
Yeah.
I'm no expert. I don't even have a degree." Um, but fast forward to 2024 now, I think I've read enough scientific literature and created enough AI prediction models that I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I do at least think I can speak knowledgeably on the topic.
You mentioned AI. How does that play into this developing new technology? How does that work into your whole operation?
Yeah, so last fall was our first Fall Explorer fall. And we rolled out the maps. They updated every day with only a 10-day forecast. They didn't go all the way through the end of the season. And essentially the fall foliage model that was supporting all of that was embarrassingly basic. The whole thing was held together by the Pythonic equivalent of duct tape and a little bit of glue. It was a miracle it worked. And surprisingly, it was actually pretty accurate last fall. So going into this season, I decided that I wanted to maybe step it up a little bit and incorporate more satellite data and really train a model to predict something meaningful. So this fall, we're predicting the brownness index. Now, we show it to everyone here as little to no color or peak color, some some classes that people would be more familiar with. But essentially, brownness index is just a measure of vegetation greenness. So as the fall progresses, the vegetation becomes less green and heads more towards that brown. And we establish these thresholds and have used AI models to consume old satellite data and old weather data and predict what that brownness index could be in the coming days.
Are you saying that you're using machine learning to go back through current and old to like notice what the normal, say, duration is of how long it takes the color to fade or like when it starts fading and those type of factors?
Exactly. So unfortunately, we don't have all that much great satellite data to work with. I know satellites have been up since the 60s or 70s, but we really only have about 6 years of really good fall foliage data from that's GO 16 is actually my
Yeah.
satellite of choice for all of this.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Once we get into like
Yeah,
the modern era, and I should just shamelessly say, anybody wants to learn more about them, we had the head of NOAA's weather program on a couple of weeks back as
oh,
NASA was getting ready to launch more. So we do
yes.
have a lot of that, and there's so much more coming. But I'm sorry, Evan, I was agreeing with you because it does feel like in the current generation, you probably got that resolution you needed.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And we could do better. And honestly, that's my dream for the future. GO 16 is currently about 2 kilometer resolution, while we have other satellites that are polar orbiting, but they're 10-meter resolution, which is much higher than 2 kilometers. That's high enough to really capture almost individual trees. So over the next 10 years, I know they've got the last GO satellite just launched, at least the last in this series. The next in the series won't go until the 30s, I believe. Um,
It's changing names too. I'm googling it right now. What's
oh,
next
that's
to
right. Yeah,
go
I didn't
satellite? It's like
wouldn't even
good
try to guess at it.
X. It's like XGen or something. Hang on,
Gen, yeah.
GeoXO.
GeoXO. Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting. That's way cooler than Go 16. I'm not
and
gonna.
the good news is it's Lockheed Martin and not Boeing.
Okay, yeah, that is good news. That's right. Okay, well, the outlook is positive then. So in the future, as we get higher resolution, that'll be great, but it's also really helpful to have more spectral bands. And there's a whole, you can really get lost in the weeds here of how satellites work. But
Yeah,
the more portions of the electromagnetic spectrum that we kind of measure with these satellites, the more easily we can identify how fall color is progressing. My goodness, I could do a whole episode just on the science that goes into this satellite stuff. It's
I
fascinating.
was just thinking I'm gonna reach out to Noah and see if they'll come back on to talk about satellites and bring you back on and just essentially say and go, and
It
I'll
would be
just
so
step back
fun.
and just let you guys go.
I genuinely don't know if anyone else, and I'm not trying to call myself novel, I just think I'm weird enough to look into it. But I don't know of anyone else who's using the GOES satellites for any kind of real-time vegetation monitoring. I think it's a rather strange application of what's intended to be an atmospheric kind of cloud
Yeah.
satellite, but it works for the ground too.
I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like we know that they've started using it for lightning detection.
Yeah.
We know that they've started using it for wildfire detection, right? So
Yeah.
that's looking at brightness of fire or even smoke reflectivity. I don't remember them mentioning vegetation in particular, but yeah, one way or the other, not a lot of people are doing it if you're not the only one.
Definitely not. Definitely
Yeah.
not. There are some papers out there, and that's kind of the fun part of what I do is I get to build on other people's work. And there hasn't been a ton of research that's really kind of pushed the fall foliage science forward in the last few years or so. But I'm trying to do my best to carry that torch and make it
Okay.
publicly accessible as well.
The next one's you then.
Maybe, yeah. I
Yeah.
I do feel a little bad about this because I'm a recent graduate of undergrad and I'm currently in a grad program as well. So I consider myself an academic, but I also keep a lot of our methods behind closed doors. And I have promised that I will publish all of these things inside of 5 years, but I got to get a competitive edge on all of these other fall foliage map producers.
You're taking the science and starting a business with it. So is it
That's
too
right.
early to call you Dr. Foliage?
Well, I think there probably already is a Dr. Foliage.
Is
Yeah, I
there?
think there
Uh,
probably is. There's somebody in New England that is like Mr. Fall Foliage. There's also the
oh
Fall
man.
Foliage guy in Boone. He's
I
awesome.
thought I was being a genius just now.
I know it's hard to believe that there's other people in this niche, but there are. It's a crazy big business, and I
Yeah.
think the fall color guy who is in Boone, he estimates that the professor at App State, he estimates that the economic impact of the fall foliage tourism industry is $30 billion annually, which is massive for something as crazy as just leaves. So there is
And
this need for
fickle.
more maps.
And so fickle when you think
Yeah,
about all those weather things we talked about.
exactly, exactly. It all comes down to when are you booking your hotel room to go to the mountains. And if you're off by, in some seasons, even just 3 or 4 days, that can be a really big deal.
And pack your patience if you're going for the Blue Ridge Parkway.
Oh, get up there
So
before 7:30 in the morning. That is what that's not, I don't keep that secret to myself. If you get up around sunrise, there's hardly anyone up there. It's wonderful.
what are some of those spots you can share with us before we let you go?
Yeah, so a couple of my favorite spots are actually on the Parkway because it's so accessible. If you go up towards Craggy Gardens, Mount Mitchell, these are all locations within a 45-minute drive of Asheville on the north side of town. They are beautiful, accessible. You have to be aware in October that Mount Mitchell State Park will get overcrowded and they'll start to shut it down and limit how many people can get in there. But nonetheless, there's plenty of trails along that whole stretch of the Parkway to visit. The same goes for the south side of the Parkway. Black Balsam and actually Graveyard Fields is the
Oh,
very first place to reach peak color each year. It's generally around October 1st, but it can be as early as late September even. So that's a great place to go. Again, pretty busy. Pack your patience. You hit the nail on the head. The Smokies aren't bad, but I, for some reason, have this weird thing about never going west of town. So I've never been to the Smokies for fall color.
there's a whole psychoanalysis that we could do there some other time, I think. But if you
There
don't go
is.
west of town, you can't go on the Great Smoky Mountain Railroad. So
Correct. Yeah, that's
consider that.
what that's a good point. I went once as a kid on the Polar Express on the Smoky Mountain
Yeah,
Road, something like that. It was wonderful.
Bryson City is calling your name.
Yes, that's
Well,
it.
Evan, it's always good to catch up with you. Wishing you the best of season and keeping your fingers crossed that the weather cooperates.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, Evan. That's Evan Fisher. You can find him over at explorefall.com and on X, unless he still calls it Twitter, which he may. Who
I don't know.
doesn't?
It depends on the
Uh,
day.
it depends on the day. And we'll see you back here next week for another